The strange thing about betrayal is that it rarely begins with a confession. It begins with something small, something easy to dismiss, something that slips into your life so quietly you almost convince yourself it doesn't matter. For me, it began at 11:47 on a Thursday night, while I was sitting alone in my kitchen finishing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 42 years old, born and raised in Colorado. And until that night, I believed my life was exactly what it appeared to be. Stable, predictable, safe. I had spent nearly 2 decades building a career in commercial construction management. Long hours, early mornings, endless meetings, and more airport terminals than I cared to remember. None of it bothered me because every mile I traveled had always pointed back toward home. Home was Olivia. 15 years of marriage. 15 years of routines that felt permanent. Or at least I thought they did. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of rain tapping against the kitchen windows. Olivia had gone upstairs hours earlier. She said she was tired. Lately she was always tired. Too tired for conversations. Too tired for dinner together. Too tired for the little traditions that used to make our marriage feel alive. I stared at a spreadsheet on my laptop while the clock pushed toward midnight. Then my phone buzzed. One notification. One message. I glanced down without thinking. The sender was Olivia. That alone was unusual. We lived in the same house. Most couples don't text each other from different floors. At least not couples who still talk. The message appeared on my screen. Going on a solo trip with my first love. Don't be jealous. I read it once. Then twice. Then a third time. The words didn't change. They sat there glowing against the dark screen like a warning sign I wasn't ready to understand. At first I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it felt absurd. Solo trip. First love. Don't be jealous. The kind of message that almost sounded like a joke. Almost. But something about it bothered me. The wording. The timing. The fact that Olivia had sent it at all. I waited for the follow-up text that would explain everything. Maybe a laughing emoji. Maybe a correction. Maybe a message saying she sent it to the wrong person. Nothing came. The screen remained silent. I looked toward the ceiling where our bedroom sat directly above the kitchen. No footsteps. No movement. Just silence. Looking back, I wish I had trusted my instincts right then. But that's the thing about people who have been married a long time. You become experts at explaining away things you don't want to believe. I told myself it was harmless. Maybe she had reconnected with an old friend. Maybe she was being sarcastic. Maybe I was overthinking it. So I locked my phone and reached for my coffee. Then my banking app notification appeared. Shared account activity. I almost ignored it. We had dozens of transactions every week. Groceries, gas, utilities, ordinary life. But this one caught my attention. A travel charge. Not unusual by itself. The amount wasn't enormous. Just over $3,000. What made me pause was the destination. Charleston, South Carolina. I stared at the notification. Olivia hadn't mentioned Charleston. She hadn't mentioned any trip at all. The rain outside grew heavier. Somewhere upstairs a floorboard creaked. I opened the transaction details and felt a strange tightness settle into my chest. 2 airline tickets. Not 1. 2. For a moment, I simply sat there staring at the screen. My mind searching for explanations. Family visit. Work conference. Booking error. Anything that made sense. But the message was still there. Going on a solo trip with my first love. Don't be jealous. Solo. Yet 2 tickets. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the rain. The house suddenly felt unfamiliar, like I was sitting inside someone else's life. I didn't confront her. I didn't march upstairs. I didn't demand answers. The truth is, calm can be more dangerous than anger. Anger makes noise. Calm listens. And as I sat there in the darkness with the glow of my phone reflected in the kitchen window, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. The message wasn't the beginning of the story. It was only the first clue. The real story had started. Months earlier. I just hadn't seen it yet. I did not sleep much that night. I lay awake beside Olivia listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing while my mind kept circling the same questions. Every few minutes I glanced toward the digital clock on the nightstand. 12:31, 1:14, 2:07. The numbers changed, but the feeling remained. Something was wrong. By morning, the rain had passed, and pale sunlight spilled across the bedroom walls. Olivia was already awake when I stepped into the kitchen. She stood at the counter scrolling through her phone with a mug of coffee in her hand. For a moment, she looked exactly like the woman I had spent 15 years loving. Blonde hair pulled back, comfortable sweater, familiar smile. The image almost convinced me the previous night had been nothing more than a misunderstanding. Almost. "You are up early," she said. Her voice sounded casual. Normal. I poured myself coffee and nodded. "Big meeting today." She smiled politely before returning her attention to the screen. That was another thing I had started noticing months earlier. Her phone had become a third person in every room. It sat beside her at dinner. It followed her into the backyard. It rested on the bathroom counter while she got ready in the morning. Looking back, the changes had arrived gradually, like cracks spreading across a windshield. Too small to notice at first, then suddenly impossible to ignore. 6 months earlier, Olivia had begun going to the gym more often. There was nothing unusual about that. People make health goals all the time. Then came the new clothes, new hairstyles, new routines. She started taking weekend walks alone. Started disappearing for hours with vague explanations that somehow never sounded suspicious in the moment. When you trust someone, you fill in the blanks for them. That is what I had done. Every missing piece received the benefit of the doubt. Every unanswered question found a convenient explanation. The human mind is remarkably talented at protecting itself from painful truths. I grabbed my laptop bag and headed for work, but the message from the night before stayed with me all day. During meetings, I caught myself staring out conference room windows. During phone calls, I found myself rereading the transaction details. 2 tickets. Charleston. Over $3,000. By lunchtime, I finally opened our shared calendar. Olivia and I had used it for years. Appointments. Family events. Vacation planning. The trip appeared 3 weeks away. 5 days long. The calendar entry contained almost no information. Just a simple note. Personal travel. That was unusual. Olivia organized everything. Color codes. Notes. Reminders. Details. She planned grocery lists with more precision than most people planned international vacations. Yet somehow this trip had almost no information attached to it. The absence of details felt louder than details themselves. That evening, I arrived home shortly after 6. Olivia was in the living room flipping through television channels. The smell of takeout drifted from the kitchen. She smiled when I walked in. "Long day?" she asked. "The usual." I loosened my tie and sat across from her. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The silence felt unfamiliar. Not hostile, just distant. Like two people waiting for someone else to start the conversation. Then she glanced at her phone again. A small smile crossed her face. Gone almost instantly. But I saw it. The kind of smile that appears when someone reads something pleasant. I remembered that expression. Years ago, it used to appear when she read my messages. The thought hit harder than I expected. Later that night, she went upstairs early. I stayed behind in the living room pretending to watch a baseball game. Around 10 o'clock, her tablet lit up on the coffee table. She rarely left it behind. A notification flashed briefly across the screen before disappearing. I only caught part of it. A name. Ryan. My stomach tightened. The name sounded familiar. Not because I knew him personally. Because I had heard it before. Years ago. During one of those conversations couples have when they share stories from before they met. Ryan. Her first serious boyfriend. Her first love. The one she once described as the person she thought she would marry. I stared at the dark screen long after the notification. Vanished. The room suddenly felt colder. Outside, the wind pushed softly against the windows. Upstairs, I could hear Olivia moving around the bedroom. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary moments. Yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. Because for the first time since receiving that message, a possibility I had been avoiding finally took shape. And once that possibility appeared, I could not make it disappear. The next morning, I woke up with Ryan's name still sitting in the back of my mind. It was strange how a single name could suddenly make old memories feel sharp again. Years earlier, Olivia had mentioned him only a handful of times. Back when we were dating, we spent long drives talking about our past the way young couples do when they are still learning each other's stories. Ryan had always been part of hers. Not a villain. Not some dramatic heartbreak. If anything, she spoke about him with a kind of quiet nostalgia that never bothered me at the time. She once told me they had dated through most of college. She said they had planned a future together. Then life pulled them in different directions. He moved across the country. She stayed. Eventually, they stopped talking. At least that was the story I remembered. For years, I never thought about him again. Why would I? We built a life together. We bought a house. We celebrated anniversaries. We survived layoffs, family illnesses, and all the ordinary challenges that come with 15 years of marriage. Ryan belonged to a chapter that had ended long before I arrived. Or at least I thought it had. Around noon, while eating lunch at my desk, curiosity finally got the better of me. I opened my browser and searched his name. Ryan Brooks. The results appeared immediately. There were hundreds of Ryans in America, but it did not take long to find the right one. His photograph stared back at me from a professional profile page. Older than the pictures Olivia had once shown me, but recognizable. Same eyes. Same smile. He worked as a business consultant based in Charleston, South Carolina. Charleston. I stared at the screen. The city from the airline tickets. The coincidence felt too precise. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe there were thousands of reasons those facts could be unrelated. Yet the deeper I looked, the harder it became to ignore. According to his profile, he had recently relocated there less than a year earlier. My stomach tightened. I minimized the browser and tried to focus on work. For the next several hours, I reviewed budgets, answered emails, and attended meetings. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Internally, every thought kept returning to the same place. That evening, I arrived home just after 7. Olivia was preparing dinner. Soft music played through a speaker in the kitchen. The smell of garlic and roasted vegetables filled the room. She looked relaxed, comfortable, almost happy. Watching her move around the kitchen, it was difficult to reconcile the woman in front of me with the growing doubts in my head. During dinner, I decided to test something. Not an accusation, just a simple conversation. Do you remember that guy you dated in college? I asked casually. Olivia paused for less than a second. So quickly most people would not have noticed. But I did. Which one? She asked. I smiled. Ryan. Her fork stopped moving. Again, only briefly. Then she laughed. That was a lifetime ago. Her answer sounded rehearsed. Not because of what she said, but because of how quickly she wanted to move past it. What made you think about him? She asked. I shrugged. No reason. Just remembered the stories. She nodded and returned to her meal. Conversation shifted elsewhere. Yet something had changed. The rest of dinner felt slightly forced, like two actors reading familiar lines while both secretly knew the script had changed. Later that night, after she went upstairs, I remained in the living room. The television played quietly in the background. Around 10:30, Olivia's phone buzzed from the kitchen counter. She had left it behind while taking a shower. I did not touch it. I did not need to. The screen lit up long enough for me to see a preview notification. One sentence. Looking forward to seeing you soon. My chest felt hollow. The sender's name was hidden, but I already knew who I believed it was. I sat there staring at the darkened screen after the notification disappeared. The house was silent except for the distant sound of running water upstairs. Looking back now, that moment mattered more than I realized. Because until then, I was still searching for innocent explanations. Still trying to preserve the version of my marriage that existed in my head. But as I sat alone in that quiet kitchen, one truth became impossible to ignore. Ryan Brooks was no longer a memory from Olivia's past. Somehow, somewhere, he had become part of her present. And I had a feeling the next thing I discovered would be far worse. The following afternoon brought the first real crack in whatever story Olivia had been trying to maintain. It happened because of something so ordinary that I almost missed it. I was working from home that Friday, reviewing project reports from the dining room table while Olivia prepared for an afternoon meeting. She moved quickly through the house, gathering documents, answering calls, checking emails. Everything seemed normal. Around 2 o'clock, she rushed upstairs after realizing she was running late. A few minutes later, the front door closed and her car backed out of the driveway. Silence settled over the house. I returned to my spreadsheets. Then I heard a faint notification sound. At first I ignored it. Another alert. Another email. But the sound came again. It was coming from the kitchen island. Olivia's tablet. She had forgotten it. That alone was unusual. She rarely went anywhere without it. The screen lit briefly before going dark. I stood there staring at it from across the room. For several seconds I did nothing. Then another notification appeared. An email preview flashed across the screen. I did not pick up the tablet. I did not unlock anything. The message preview was visible without touching it. What I saw made my stomach tighten immediately. The subject line read, "Final itinerary confirmation." Beneath it was a partial sentence. "Looking forward to spending those 5 days together." My pulse slowed instead of quickening. That surprised me. Maybe because part of me had already begun expecting bad news. I walked closer. The preview disappeared before I could read more. The kitchen suddenly felt very quiet. Outside, a lawn service truck hummed somewhere down the street. A sprinkler clicked rhythmically from a neighbor's yard. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary afternoon. Yet something inside me had shifted. Looking back, that moment was important because it marked the point where suspicion started becoming evidence. Not proof. Not yet. But evidence. I returned to the dining room table and tried to work. For nearly 20 minutes, I stared at the same page without absorbing a single word. Eventually, I closed my laptop and made a cup of coffee. The smell filled the kitchen as sunlight poured through the windows. My eyes drifted back toward the forgotten tablet. I remembered all the times Olivia had accused me of being too trusting. She used to laugh about it. Said I always believed the best in people. Maybe she was right. Maybe that was why I had ignored so many warning signs. 6 months of distance. 6 months of secrecy. 6 months of unexplained changes. I carried my coffee to the living room and sat quietly. Then another memory surfaced. 3 weeks earlier, Olivia had canceled our anniversary weekend. She claimed an unexpected work obligation came up. At the time, I accepted the explanation without question. Now I remembered something else. The date matched one of the weekends Ryan had posted photographs from Charleston during a business conference. The coincidence unsettled me. One coincidence can be ignored. Several begin forming a pattern. By evening, Olivia returned home smiling. She looked energized in a way I had not seen for months. During dinner, she talked about future plans, home improvement projects, and vacation ideas. The conversation felt almost too cheerful, like someone working hard to maintain normalcy. Then she casually mentioned her upcoming trip. I may be difficult to reach for a few days, she said. The schedule will probably be busy. Busy. The word echoed in my head. 5 days. 2 airline tickets. Charleston. Ryan. Final itinerary confirmation. Spending those 5 days together. I nodded and continued eating. I asked no questions. Her shoulders seemed to relax. That reaction told me more than any answer could have. Later, that night, after she fell asleep, I sat alone in the darkness of my home office. The glow from my monitor illuminated stacks of project folders and framed family photographs. One picture caught my attention. It was taken 12 years earlier during a road trip through Montana. Olivia stood beside me smiling into the summer sun. Looking at that photograph felt strange, like staring at two strangers wearing our faces. I wondered when exactly things had changed. More importantly, I wondered whether the woman sleeping upstairs had already decided to leave long before I discovered any of this. Then another thought entered my mind, one that refused to leave. If Olivia was hiding something, there was a chance this trip was not the destination. It was only the beginning of a much larger plan. And for the first time, I realized I needed to stop looking at what she was saying and start paying attention to what she was preparing for. The following week moved with the strange rhythm that comes when you are waiting for something you cannot stop. Every morning looked normal. Every conversation sounded normal. Yet underneath the surface, nothing felt normal anymore. Olivia's trip was now less than 2 weeks away, and with each passing day, I found myself paying closer attention to details I would have ignored before. Not because I wanted to, because I could not help it. One Tuesday evening, I came home to find Olivia sitting at the kitchen island reviewing documents. Her laptop was open beside a glass of sparkling water. She looked up and smiled when I walked in. The smile seemed genuine. That was the confusing part. People imagine deception always looks cold or obvious. In reality, it often looks exactly like the person you have always known. We ate dinner together. We talked about work. We discussed replacing the aging water heater in the basement. Ordinary married couple conversations. Yet several times during dinner her phone lit up, and each time she turned it face down before reading the notification. The movement was subtle, practiced, automatic. I doubt she even realized she was doing it. Later that night, she fell asleep early on the couch while watching television. Around 11 o'clock, I covered her with a blanket and reached for the remote. As I did, a folded piece of paper slipped from between the couch cushions and landed on the floor. I picked it up without thinking. It appeared to be part of a printed travel itinerary. Most of the page contained flight information and hotel details. I was about to place it back when something caught my attention. 2 names. Olivia Carter. Ryan Brooks. For a moment, I simply stared at the paper. The room felt perfectly still. The television continued playing quietly in the background while the words remained fixed in front of me. 2 names. 1 reservation. 1 itinerary. The evidence was no longer made of suspicions or assumptions. It existed in black ink on white paper. I carefully folded the page and placed it exactly where I found it. Then I sat in the darkness of the living room for nearly an hour. Not angry. Not yet. Mostly disappointed. There is a particular kind of sadness that arrives when reality finally confirms what your instincts have been warning you about. Looking back, that was the moment something inside me stopped hoping for innocent explanations. The next morning I began paying attention to something else. Money. Over the years Olivia and I had built substantial savings. Joint investments. Retirement accounts. Emergency funds. Nothing extravagant, but enough to provide security. A few days later, while reviewing monthly finances, I noticed several transfers that seemed unusual. The amounts were not enormous. A few $1,000s here. A few thousand there. Spread across several months. Small enough to avoid attracting attention. Large enough to matter. When added together, the total exceeded $20,000. The destination account was unfamiliar. I stared at the numbers for a long time. Maybe there was an explanation. There always seemed to be an explanation. Yet the timing bothered me. The transfers began around the same period Ryan reappeared in Charleston. The same period Olivia started changing. The same period secrecy entered our marriage. Patterns were beginning to emerge everywhere. That Friday afternoon, another piece fell into place. I received an unexpected call from an old mutual friend named Melissa. She and Olivia had known each other since college. The conversation started casually. Family, careers, life. Then Melissa mentioned something strange. I ran into Ryan at a conference last spring, she said. My grip tightened slightly on the phone. I kept my voice neutral. Really? Yeah. Funny coincidence. He told me he had recently reconnected with someone from his past. He seemed pretty excited about it. Melissa moved on to another topic without realizing what she had just handed me. But her words stayed behind long after the call ended. Reconnected with someone from his past. By then the pieces were forming a picture I could no longer ignore. The trip. The messages, the itinerary, the transfers, the secrecy. Yet even then I had no idea how much larger the situation truly was. Because what I believed was a story about an old relationship returning was actually something much more calculated. And the first glimpse of that truth arrived 3 days later inside an email Olivia never intended for me to see. 3 days later, I discovered something that changed the entire direction of the story. Until then, I believed I was dealing with a rekindled relationship from Olivia's past. Painful, yes, but simple. What I found suggested something far more deliberate. It happened on a Monday morning. Olivia left early for work after receiving a phone call she described as urgent. In her rush, she forgot to log out of the family printer connected to our home network. I did not notice immediately. In fact, I spent most of the morning reviewing project schedules and answering emails. Around 11 o'clock, I walked into my office to print a construction report. As the printer warmed up, I noticed a document already sitting in the output tray. Several pages. Freshly printed. The first page contained financial projections. At first I assumed it belonged to one of Olivia's work assignments. Then I noticed our names. My name. Her name. I sat down and began reading. The document appeared to be a personal planning worksheet. Future expenses. Estimated asset values. Housing projections. Retirement calculations. None of that was unusual. Married couples discuss financial futures all the time. Then I reached the section that made my stomach drop. Scenario A. Retain current marital assets. Scenario B. Post-separation financial structure. I reread the words twice. Post-separation. The document continued for several pages. Estimated proceeds from property division. Individual account balances. Monthly income forecasts. Relocation expenses. The language was clinical. Organized. Detailed. This was not the work of someone casually daydreaming about a different future. This looked like planning. Careful planning. The kind that takes time. The kind that starts long before anyone mentions it aloud. I continued reading. Near the end of the document, another name appeared. Ryan Brooks. Not repeatedly. Just once. A reference connected to a proposed housing arrangement in Charleston. My chest felt strangely calm. Looking back, that calmness surprised me. Months earlier the discovery would have shattered me. Now it felt different. The pieces had been assembling themselves for weeks. This was simply another piece finding its place. I placed the document back exactly where I found it and returned to my desk. Outside the office window, sunlight reflected off the neighboring rooftops. A delivery truck rolled slowly down the street. Everything looked normal, yet nothing was normal anymore. That evening, Olivia arrived home carrying takeout from one of our favorite restaurants. She smiled, asked about my day, talked about weekend plans. The contrast between her behavior and what I had read earlier felt surreal. The woman sitting across from me discussed landscaping projects while secretly preparing for a life that apparently did not include me. During dinner, she seemed unusually cheerful, almost relieved. Several times I caught her smiling at incoming messages before quickly locking her phone. At one point, she even suggested taking a vacation together later that year. I nodded politely. Inside, I found myself wondering whether she believed her own performance or whether she simply hoped I believed it. Later that night, another piece fell into place. Around midnight, I woke up thirsty and headed downstairs for water. As I passed the home office, I noticed light beneath the door. Olivia was inside. The door was slightly open. I did not enter. I simply glanced through the gap while walking past. She sat at the desk studying financial documents on her laptop. Her expression looked focused, intentional, not emotional, not conflicted, methodical. That image stayed with me long after I returned to bed, because it confirmed something I had been resisting. Whatever was happening was not impulsive. It was organized, planned, structured. The following morning, I reviewed the timeline in my head. The money transfers, the travel arrangements, Ryan's return, the hidden communications, the financial projections. Separately, each detail could be explained away. Together, they told a story that appeared to have started many months before I knew it existed. Yet one question continued bothering me. If Olivia was preparing for a future without me, why maintain the illusion of our marriage? Why continue pretending everything was normal? I did not have the answer yet, but I had a feeling the answer involved more than emotions, more than nostalgia, more than a reunion with an old boyfriend. And as I sat alone in my office that morning staring at the city skyline beyond my window, I realized the truth I was chasing was probably bigger than the relationship itself. Much bigger. The realization changed the way I approached everything. Until then, I had been reacting to discoveries as they appeared. Now I began preparing. Not for revenge. Not for confrontation. For clarity. The following week, I scheduled a meeting with a family attorney recommended by a colleague I trusted. I did not tell anyone. I took a personal day from work, drove downtown, and spent 2 hours explaining everything I had learned. The attorney listened carefully, taking notes while I laid out the timeline. The messages, the travel plans, the financial transfers, the printed projections. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. "You have been gathering information," she said. "That was smart. Keep doing that. Do not make emotional decisions. Make informed ones." It was not dramatic advice, but it was exactly what I needed to hear. For months, I had been living inside uncertainty. Facts were beginning to replace uncertainty. Over the next several days, I quietly organized documents, account statements, property records, tax filings, retirement information. Everything was copied, categorized, and stored securely. The process felt strangely calming. Every file I reviewed gave me a clearer understanding of my own life. Looking back, I realized how often I had assumed everything was fine simply because I wanted it to be. One evening, while reviewing account activity, I noticed something new. Another transfer, larger than the previous ones, nearly $12,000. The destination matched the same unfamiliar account I had identified earlier. I sat at my desk staring at the numbers while twilight settled outside the window. The transfer had occurred less than 24 hours earlier. The timing felt significant. Olivia's trip was only days away now. Whatever plans existed appeared to be accelerating. That same night, she seemed unusually cheerful. She talked about restaurants she wanted to visit, mentioned a new coffee shop opening nearby, discussed replacing furniture in the guest bedroom. Listening to her felt surreal. We were discussing throw pillows while our marriage quietly drifted toward a cliff neither of us acknowledged. Or perhaps only one of us acknowledged. Around 9 o'clock, she received a phone call and stepped outside onto the back patio. Through the kitchen window, I could see her silhouette moving slowly beneath the porch light. Several times she smiled. Once she laughed. The conversation lasted nearly 30 minutes. When she returned inside, she looked almost relieved. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just work stuff," she replied immediately. Too immediately. I simply nodded. Later that night, I sat awake long after she fell asleep. The house was silent. Moonlight spilled across the bedroom floor. Beside me, Olivia slept peacefully. I found myself studying her face and wondering when exactly we became strangers. Not enemies. Strangers. There is a difference. Enemies at least acknowledge each other honestly. Strangers perform roles. The next morning brought another unexpected development. My attorney called. She had reviewed the financial information I provided and identified something I had overlooked. Several of the transfers appeared connected to a newly established limited liability company registered in South Carolina. Charleston. My chest tightened as she explained the details. The company had been formed less than 6 months earlier. The timing aligned almost perfectly with everything else. She could not determine ownership from the information available, but the pattern was concerning. After the call ended, I sat quietly in my office for a long time. Outside, traffic moved through downtown Denver as usual. People hurried to meetings. Delivery trucks made their rounds. Life continued. Yet my understanding of my own situation had shifted again. What I initially believed was an emotional reunion now appeared connected to financial planning as well. The pieces were fitting together with uncomfortable precision. That evening, Olivia finished packing for her trip. 2 suitcases stood neatly beside the front door. Travel documents rested on the kitchen counter. She seemed excited, energized, ready. I helped carry one of the bags downstairs. She thanked me with a quick smile. Watching her, I realized something important. Whatever destination she believed she was traveling toward, she assumed I knew nothing about it. She believed the story remained under her control. But for the first time since receiving that late-night message weeks earlier, I felt something unexpected. Not fear, not confusion, certainty. Because the truth was finally taking shape. And I had a feeling the moment of pretending was almost over. Olivia left on a Thursday morning, just before sunrise. The sky above Denver was still dark when I carried her second suitcase to the front porch. The air felt cool and crisp, the kind of morning that usually made me think about fresh starts. This one felt different. She hugged me before leaving. Not a long embrace. Just enough to maintain the appearance of normalcy. Then she climbed into the rideshare waiting at the curb and disappeared down the street. I stood there for several seconds after the taillights vanished. 15 years of marriage had narrowed into a single quiet moment on an empty driveway. Once she was gone, the house felt unusually still. No television in the background. No conversations drifting from another room. Just silence. I spent the morning reviewing documents with my attorney over a video call. By then we had assembled a clear picture of the financial situation. The transfers, the accounts, the planning documents, the timeline. More importantly, we had taken steps to protect assets that legally required protection. Everything was being handled carefully and properly. Facts, documentation, process. No drama, no emotional decisions. Exactly as she advised. That afternoon my phone remained mostly silent. Olivia sent a photograph of Charleston's waterfront with a short message saying the weather was beautiful. A few hours later she sent another message about a restaurant she planned to visit. Reading them felt strange. The updates sounded like messages from someone on a normal trip. Yet I knew there was another story running beneath the surface. I responded politely. Nothing more. The next several days followed a similar pattern. She checked in occasionally, shared photographs, mentioned sightseeing locations, described coffee shops and historic buildings. What she never mentioned was Ryan. Not once. That omission became its own answer. Meanwhile, information continued arriving from other sources. Public records, financial reviews, timeline analysis. None of it revealed anything explosive by itself. But together the pattern became impossible to ignore. The trip was not an isolated event. It was part of a larger plan that had been developing for months. By the 4th day, I no longer felt surprised by new discoveries. The shock had already passed. What remained was clarity. Sunday evening finally arrived. Olivia's flight was scheduled to land shortly before 7. I spent most of the day organizing paperwork. A neat stack sat on the dining room table. Account records, travel confirmations, financial summaries, printed documents. Everything arranged chronologically. Not because I intended to argue, because I wanted facts to speak for themselves. Outside, The sun disappeared behind the mountains and darkness settled across the neighborhood. At 6:48, headlights swept across the front windows. A car door closed. Footsteps approached the porch. The front door opened, and Olivia walked inside, pulling her suitcase behind her. She looked relaxed. Happy even. "I am home," she announced with a smile. For a brief moment she appeared completely unaware that anything had changed. Then she noticed the dining room table. Her eyes lingered on the organized stack of documents. The smile faded slightly. Not completely. Just enough. "What is all this?" she asked. Her voice remained calm, but I noticed the hesitation. I sat across from the table and folded my hands. "I think we need to talk." The room became very quiet. Outside, a dog barked somewhere down the street. Inside, neither of us moved. She slowly set down her purse. Her gaze shifted from the papers to me and back again. "About what?" she asked. Looking back, that question marked the end of months of pretending. Not because of what she said, because both of us already knew the answer. I slid the first document across the table. Then another. Travel records. Financial transfers. Planning projections. Each piece connected to the next. Olivia stared at them without speaking. The confidence she carried through the front door began fading with every page. I remained calm. No raised voice. No accusations. Just facts. One after another. For several minutes neither of us spoke much at all. The silence felt heavier than any argument could have. Eventually she looked up. For the first time in weeks, the performance disappeared. And what replaced it told me everything I needed to know. For a long moment Olivia said nothing. She sat at the dining room table surrounded by documents she never expected me to see. The confidence that had carried her through the front door was gone. In its place was something quieter. Something uncertain. I watched her carefully. Not with anger. Not anymore. Anger requires energy. What I felt was clarity. She looked down at the travel confirmations again, then at the financial records, then, finally at me. "How much do you know?" she asked softly. It was a strange question. Not because of the words. Because it was the first completely honest thing she had said in months. I leaned back in my chair. Enough. The silence returned. Outside, the neighborhood continued with its usual Sunday evening routine. Cars passed occasionally. Porch lights flickered on. Somewhere in the distance a lawn sprinkler clicked steadily through its cycle. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life. Yet inside our house, 15 years of marriage had reached its conclusion. Olivia stared at the table for several seconds before speaking again. This time there was no performance. No carefully crafted explanations. No attempt to redirect the conversation. Just exhaustion. She admitted she had reconnected with Ryan months earlier. What began as occasional conversations slowly became something larger. Then came plans. Discussions about the future. Discussions that increasingly excluded me. Hearing the words hurt less than I expected. Perhaps because I had already lived through the painful part. The uncertainty. The doubt. The endless search for answers. Facts, even unpleasant ones, have a way of bringing relief. We talked for nearly 3 hours that night. Calmly. Respectfully. There were no dramatic scenes. No shouting. Just two people acknowledging a truth neither could avoid any longer. By midnight we both understood where things stood. The following weeks moved quickly. Attorneys handled paperwork. Financial matters followed legal procedures. Assets were divided appropriately. The house eventually sold. Life became a series of meetings, signatures, and practical decisions. None of it felt cinematic. Real endings rarely do. 6 months later, I found myself standing on the balcony of a condominium overlooking downtown Denver. The sun was setting behind the mountains, turning the horizon shades of gold and orange. A cool breeze moved through the city streets below. My life looked different now. Smaller and so,